Hello, Thaddeus.
It's Saturday.
Today I'm talking about Prefuturism, but before I do, I have a few caveats. One, in consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me, and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. Two, in talking about an academic subject, I like to write my thoughts out ahead of time so I have a clear picture of what it is I need to say and how I need to say it in order to explain it. However, I feel like there's no way that I could say it out loud extemporaneously without taking 20 takes per sentence, and that would take me well over 3,000 hours. Thus, I've created a crude teleprompter, so if it looks like I'm reading something right behind the camera, it's because I am. 3. In terms of Prefuturism, much like evolutionary theory before Darwin, I don't quite have a mechanism worked out to explain how certain things function, though Lamarckian inheritance is right out. In reality, the solution I'm leaning towards comes from my idea of New Romanticism, which is built around magical realism. I'll do a video about that eventually. 4. The other day I was rereading Fukuyama's End of History essay, and he makes a statement that the liberal democratic state is the end of history, and in that context, juxtaposing Prefuturism against that, Prefuturism ironically becomes the rebirth of history in a way. And that is all the caveats I have.
Well, it's gonna be the future soon, and I won't always be this way. When the things that make me weak and strange get engineered away.
As you and probably most everybody else watching this might know, I'm interested in the creation of identity and the process of defining the self. A large percentage of my academic work focused on how postmodernism affected identity, particularly as the movement called into question the idea of unshakable foundations upon which identity is traditionally built. As you might imagine, finding that the entire basis of your identity is not based on a solid premise and is as fluid as a non-Newtonian fluid can be frightening. The Tea Party exemplifies the fallout from this recognition. They were reminded the future happens and promptly flipped. Their identity felt threatened not because their identity was changing, but rather others had a different identity under the same title. As a movement, they reacted to the postmodern notion that foundations don't exist by perceiving a lack of foundations rather than accepting those foundations never were. The Tea Party's reaction illustrates one of the two typical responses to postmodernism's effect on identity construction. The first, the aforementioned flip-a-lid screaming "it's not possible" like your father just announced his parentage after cutting your hand off, is a far too common conclusion, particularly among an older population raised to believe in grand narratives that explain the self. The other, a hallmark of postmodern protagonists, is to become a pseudo-philosopher with a cynical streak that would make the lives of American literature's most famous suicides seem like joyous romps through Candyland. Unless they're diabetic, then it's kind of a dick move. There is a third and more prominently chosen alternative. However, the option is less considered. Not caring. Sure, this option might involve a fair bit too much MTV and place you solidly in the camp of awful human being, because you don't care how your identity is being constructed, by whom it is constructed, and for what benefit they construct it that way. Yet, within the same space is the potential to shift from postmodern identity towards pre-future constructions of the self. The difference between postmodern and pre-futurist constructions lies in a considered approach to the ramifications of the death of foundations or meta-narratives, and where in time we turn to construct ourselves. In this space lies the empowerment of the individual through the ability of the individual to construct his or her own identity in opposition to the other, particularly historical and corporate influences. Topographically, a myriad of difficult terrains plague this space. As you mentioned, the past, present, and future are in constant flux because, like an author up against Roland Barthes, we have no control over how the other will construct their own narrative. Further complicating these constructions is the multiple and contradicting constructions of the same identity and their willingness to recognize the plurality of the self. The Tea Party's essential American identity as an inflexible idea of what it means to be an American bears witness to the problems of constructing an identity out of history, as the other in this example adheres to a narrow, rigid, and immemorial narrative of history. Even with the recognition of history's fluidity, the historical record is not completely malleable, and thus constrains the possible constructions of selfhood that could originate from it. We focus on the once was and tie ourselves to those who came before, mimicking, in a broad definition, the creation of tribalism. The essentialism of the other makes the creation of the self from the past a troublesome affair, while the present is beset with the traps and pitfalls of the capitalist mode of production. Identities are commodities, made to be desirable, and sold for profit. They are, like the American middle class, based in consumption. Pre-futurist identity construction upends this dynamic through a focus on the limitless topography of the future. By embracing the lack of narrative, essentially not caring that we lack the capacity to ever truly ground ourselves, we can create identities around the idea of who we wish to become. The uncertainty principle allows us all options until we reach the future, a Sisyphean task that keeps us constrained to the pre-future. Ideally, identity becomes based on who we want to be, based in performance, and expunges the past. However, I suspect a total denunciation of the past and present is impossible, and the best to be hoped for is an identity of the future that ameliorates the influences of past and present methods of construction. I will see you in the future.